You're getting ready to retire because you've worked hard and you've done everything the right way. But do you have that tiny feeling keeping you up at night because you may have too many eggs in one basket? That small feeling preventing you from sleeping now can turn you into a full-blown insomniac later. I'm here to help you rest easy. Let me show you how. I'm Brad, a certified financial planner, and I'm here to help ensure that your money makes it there with you in retirement. Recently, I had a guy named Jim come into the office with his wife Sandy. Jim worked at Northrop Grumman, a large defense contractor, and worked his way up to the C-suite. He was getting towards the end of his career and he wanted to retire at the age of 60. He'd been working long hours, his health had started to decline a bit, he'd been dealing with extreme levels of stress. Jim was ready to be done working and reduce those stress levels. With 25% of his 401k invested in Northrop Grumman stock, Jim thought he had gamed the system and had a pile of money to securely retire at age 60 instead of 65 or later like his peers. As you can see, the stock performed well over the years, and he thought his strategy made a lot of sense. On paper, the numbers look good. Jim's a smart guy, and he'd been a do-it-yourself investor when it came to his retirement plan. Jim didn't think he needed a financial advisor, but his wife Sandy encouraged him to seek professional guidance before he retired at the age of 60. While Jim has been a good family leader, he's also made some financial errors in the past. Sandy always mentions how they overpaid on a car loan in 2008, and they invested in his college buddy's can't-miss pizza shop that closed in months. So Sandy really pressed Jim to meet with me before retiring at 60, as unlike other money blunders, you only get one shot at getting a 30-year retirement right. While Jim was still apprehensive about paying for advice, the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank in 2023 opened his mind to the importance of diversification and seeking wise counsel. Sandy was still very concerned about what could happen to them if his company went under, so they finally booked a meeting. During our conversation, Jim was insistent that nothing would ever happen to Northrop Grumman, a government contractor, and he called the SVB bank failure a one-off. I reminded him that big blue chip companies go under all the time and they take their stock prices with them. Remember Bear Stearns, too big to fail, and Enron, the darling of the energy sector until we found out that they were cooking the books? How about Sears until Amazon took them down, or my favorite, Blockbuster, before Netflix put them out of business? You never know what could happen, so the key is to diversify and manage risk. Even after those examples, Jim still thought that nothing would ever happen to Northrop. But while we were talking, he did express concern that if something should happen to him, Sandy would be lost. Jim realized that do-it-yourself meant that he left everyone out on the plan, including the woman he loved. The pain of Sandy losing him and not having enough money to last for a 30-year retirement was finally enough to get him starting to consider my advice. So let me show you the plan we created for Jim and Sandy, which uses a strategy called Net Unrealized Appreciation, or NUA. Before I do that, let's get to know Jim and Sandy a little bit more, unpack their current financial situation, and see what they want their retirement to look like. Now, to be clear, we've changed the names. This is not really Jim and Sandy. We've actually created fictitious names here for confidentiality purposes, but everything you're about to see is based on a real-life scenario. Jim and Sandy have done a really good job of saving for retirement. They've been saving, they've been doing all the things they're supposed to do, preparing, but what they really lacked was a coordinated financial plan. And that's where we came in. And Jim had been doing it all by himself, and Jim was starting to recognize that he did need some help as he's getting closer to retirement and his situation was getting more complex. Jim was 59 years of age, and his main goal was to retire at age 60. And Sandy was 56, and she stopped working years ago. In fact, she'd spent a lot of time raising the kids and really helping to get them launched. And speaking of the kids, Megan is 30 years of age and dating a really nice guy. And they've got a wedding on the horizon in about a year. And Sandy's really excited to help Megan plan that wedding. Meanwhile, Derek is 28 years old and he would really like to buy his first piece of real estate. And Jim and Sandy would like to help him do that. And then there's Brett, and Brett's the baby. He's 22 years old and he's applying to graduate school. And that's another thing that Sandy would really like to help figure out how to pay for. So here's some things that are very important to both Jim and Sandy. And as I mentioned, Jim wants to retire at 60. He really wants to reduce the stress in his life. It's just becoming unmanageable at work. And he'd like to focus on his health. Jim's goal is to lose 20 pounds and just start to get back in better shape. Jim's also asked me questions about should he purchase additional life insurance, and that's something that we're going to explore in our work together. Jim shared with me that he really would like to travel with Sandy. They're both very passionate about traveling. And in retirement, Jim wants to learn to play pickleball, and he also wants to take the family on a family vacation to Hawaii. And the other thing Jim wants to do is spend some more time on his boat. Meanwhile, Sandy is really excited. She wants to travel to Italy, and she also is excited to help Megan plan the wedding. She'd like to help Brett pay for grad school and help Derek buy a condo. The other thing that Sandy mentioned to me that's important is being able to spend more time with her mom, who's getting on in years. Some of the family goals, they've got an annual travel budget of $18,000 per year, starting now and running until Jim's age 85. That's usually about when people start to slow down and they don't travel as much. The other thing, since Jim is retiring before age 65 when Medicare starts, we've built into his budget a health insurance line item there of about $1,000 a month. And this is one of those mistakes I see a lot of people do who are doing this on their own, is they don't properly account for the cost of medical insurance. And so we've taken care of that in Jim and Sandy's plan. And then they would like to remodel the guest room so when Sandy's mom comes out to visit, it'll just feel really clean and good when she's out visiting at the house. And then of course, the big one is the family trip to Hawaii in 2026, and they've allocated $25,000 to do this. And part of the other thing that they've shared that's important to me is they want to be able to leave the kids about $500,000 each at the end of their lives. And so we've taken that goal and we've put that into the plan as well. So with that, let's take a look at the balance sheet and see what Jim and Sandy have to work with here. Like a lot of people, Jim's main source of saving for retirement has been inside of his 401k, and that's where a large chunk of their retirement savings is located. And Jim does have an IRA from his very first job many, many years ago. And Sandy also has an IRA from the year she spent working before she ended up spending time at home with the kids, and that's grown to a pretty sizable amount as well. And then both of them have small Roth IRA accounts that are growing tax-free, and this will be part of what they'd like to leave to the kids at the end of their life. From a net worth perspective, they're in good shape, but Jim and Sandy are still very concerned about, is this enough to be able to retire and not worry about running out of money in retirement? And that's what our plan that we put together for them was designed to help show them that they could do this. And so what we did is we put a plan together. So they would like to spend about $10,000 a month. They want to have the $18,000 a year for travel. We also have the medical before age 65. We've got federal and state taxes. All of that is flowing into their plan. And we've used very conservative growth rates, again, just to not over project here in the plan. And even with conservative growth rates, we're anticipating that if they can execute to the plan, they're in great shape for a nice retirement. So we're projecting that at the age of 100, Sandy's going to have about $10.3 million liquid left to be able to give the kids. But don't take our word for it. We always stress test it. That's part of the work we do, because if we know anything about markets, it's that they never give you a 5.5 or a 6% linear return. It's either up really big or down really big. And we ran it against 1,000 randomly generated scenarios. And in all 1,000 scenarios, they had a 100% probability of success. They did not run out of money. So they were in fantastic shape. And this, you could see the stress Jim was visibly relieved when he saw this, and you could see the tension start to come out of him just a little bit as he was envisioning that retirement that was right on the horizon. But we reminded him that he did have a looming time bomb inside of his investment portfolio, and that was the heavy concentration of money inside of one company. And should anything happen to Northrop Grumman, Jim could be in really bad shape. And so we modeled a scenario of what happens if something dramatically wrong happens to Northrop Grumman. And we showed that if should something happen to Northrop, this has the potential to cost Jim and Sandy over $10 million. But what's worse, the stress test on the retirement plan, which once was at 100% probability of success, now declined down to 46%, which is well out of the confidence zone. This was enough to get Jim to see the value and the importance of diversifying outside of that concentrated position in Northrop. So he started to open his mind to the importance of diversification. What's really cool about this is even if Jim's right and nothing were to happen to Northrop Grumman, we could still improve the situation by doing a couple of really good things on his investment portfolio. Take a look at Jim's investments. He had 25% of his holdings inside of one company stock, Northrop Grumman. And while Northrop Grumman has had a really nice run over the last 25 years, the big picture is that Jim's 401k is not doing that well. The performance is poor. The risk level, as measured right here, is high. This is on a scale of 1 to 100. And a score of 71 is he's taking stock market-like risk, meaning this risk score of 71 might be appropriate for someone who's 35 or 40, but for someone who's 59 years old and within a year or a few months actually of retirement, this is way too risky. And you could see it right here that on average, this portfolio could go down 15.5% in any given year, in every year, in fact. And we would think that that would be normal for a portfolio that's designed like this. And it gets worse. You can see that the internal expenses on those mutual funds in the 401k are very high, very expensive mutual funds, north of 1%, which is really outrageous. The dividend is low at 1.32, and the performance is bad at less than 4%. So even if Jim were right and Northrop Grumman were to be just fine and not go out of business, we could dramatically improve upon these results by diversifying into a basket of low-cost ETFs or exchange-traded funds. Let me show you what I'm talking about. By putting 70% into stock ETFs and 30% into bond ETFs, we can take the performance, which was south of 4% on his existing portfolio, and bump that up to north of 9% in this new mix of assets. And on top of that, how we're doing that is we're dramatically lowering that expense ratio down to 0.16%. We're increasing the dividend up to nearly 2.6%. And overall, this is just a much more efficiently designed portfolio. So at the very least, the investment experience can be optimized and improved. And once Jim saw that, he got it. But you could just see he had the aha moment, the light bulb went on that, okay, I get it. And he'd been hanging on to this one company stock because it's really all he knew. He'd been with that company for 25 years. They'd done very, very well, but he just kind of lost sight of the big picture. And we helped him to regain sight of that big picture. And once he saw it, he got it. And so with that, we really had two options of how he could fix this. The first was to retire, roll everything over to his IRA, sell everything in a tax-deferred manner, and then rebalance to the new portfolio. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is by implementing the Net Unrealized Appreciation strategy, which allows him to get to the end goal of having a more efficient investment portfolio, but getting there while saving money on taxes, lowering the tax bill. And that's what Jim elected to do. Let me show you how the Net Unrealized Appreciation strategy works and how it's so powerful. So as a quick aside, you need to know a couple of important details. The first is, in order to avoid the 10% penalty on any sort of distribution, you need to be over the age of 59 and a half. So make sure you know the rules on that. And then also the 1-year rule says that when you do the NUA and you also do the rollover, it all has to happen in the same calendar year. And the last thing you should know is that you don't have to do the NUA strategy on all the shares of your employer stock. You can cherry pick, and really what you should do is cherry pick the lowest cost basis shares, because that's going to have the most powerful impact and tax savings. So with that, let's dive into Jim and Sandy's situation. They had about $440,000 in Northrop Grumman stock, and the cost basis on this stock, or the amount that they had paid for it over the years, was very low at $70,000. And let me show you why right here. Jim and Sandy had been purchasing shares of Northrop Grumman for nearly 25 years. And back in the day, they were paying $30 per share. And the share price stayed relatively low for almost an entire decade before starting to pick up steam there in 2014. And then today, it's trading at $473, almost $474. But way back in the day, they were picking up shares for $30 and $40. And that's why their cost basis is so low. And that's part of what makes this strategy very impactful for Jim and Sandy. And so let me show you, here's a really good visual of how it works. When the cost basis comes out, so that's the $70,000 that comes out, that $70,000 you pay tax at ordinary income rates. And for them, that amount was $16,800. But then all of the gains in the stock, the $370,000 of gains right here, that rather than being taxed at ordinary income rates, those gains are taxed at the lower long-term capital gains rates, which for Jim and Sandy came out to a tax bill of $55,500. So the total tax liability for the NUA strategy for them was right around $76,000. When you compare that to what people do normally, which is just roll everything to the IRA and then take distributions from there, had they followed that strategy that the average retiree does, that would have resulted in a tax bill of nearly $141,000. So when we compare the two strategies, doing the NUA strategy resulted in a tax savings of nearly $65,000. Let that number sink in for a minute. That's nearly 2.5 trips to Hawaii that Jim and Sandy want to take with the family, just because they know the rules, they know the tax code, they have a plan, and they're taking advantage of the rules and they're executing on their plan. By the end of the meeting, DIY Jim realized that the value of my financial advice was far in excess of the fee we charged, and he became a valued client. With my plan, Jim was able to retire at age 60, saved a huge amount of money on taxes, and could now ensure that Sandy had financial security if anything should happen to him. All elements that create financial peace. While Jim and Sandy's story doesn't reflect everyone's situation, it's one example of how working with me can be beneficial. If you'd like to talk to me about your retirement, there's a link in the description below to book a meeting. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something.